Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Paul Harrison, and I'm delighted, on behalf of the Ho Center for Buddhist Studies at Stanford, to welcome you to this inaugural lecture in the Center's new T.T. and W.F. Chow Buddhism and Contemporary Society series, and also to introduce our distinguished speaker, Dr. Jack Kornfield. Jack last spoke here in this auditorium in 2014, and his topic then was mindfulness, love, and graceful living in fast times. This evening, we are now in interesting times, apparently. So I see a pattern here in Jack's titles, and also a transition from fast to interesting, which I suspect is not an improvement. But one thing has not changed in the intervening decade since Jack last addressed people here, and that is that he has practically filled this auditorium, indicating that you all know who he is and that there is very little need for an introduction on my part. Given that Jack Kornfield is one of the best known and most consequential teachers of Buddhism and Buddhist-inspired meditation techniques in the United States and indeed the world, as well as a prolific author, I think I can be brief, and he will be happy about that. Jack Kornfield's career stretches from his early years as a Peace Corps volunteer and then a Buddhist monk in Thailand, Burma, and India, to his founding of the Insight Meditation Society with Sharon Salzberg and Joseph Goldstein in Massachusetts in 1975, and then later the Spirit Rock Meditation Center in California. Now, halfway through the third decade of the 21st century, he is still active as a teacher and as a teacher of teachers and the grand teacher of teachers, and one can probably go on. Continuing, therefore, a career that now equals the Buddha's own in number of years, and includes, and he may not remember this, giving my 10-year-old son his first driving lesson in one of the Spirit Rock golf carts back in 2014. I like to think, fanciful as this may sound, that my son's calm and steady hand on the wheel these days owes something to the seed that Jack planted on that day so long ago. Many have benefited from Jack's teaching and guidance, and so it is both a pleasure and a privilege to welcome him here tonight to talk to us about a steady heart, Buddhist wisdom and practice for interesting times. So with that, I invite you to join me in welcoming again Jack Kornfield to Stanford this evening.
Thank you. How's the sound? Oh, it's good. How nice to see you all. Good evening. What a pleasure to be back. Winter has started, and it's okay. We need the rain. So it's very, very good. And thank you to Irene and the whole Ho Center and Paul for inviting me again back to Stanford. I think before anything else, let's just take a few long breaths and sit quietly for a minute, more or less 60 or so seconds. You've been sitting already. Thank you for that introduction. Anyway, close your eyes for a moment if you're comfortable, and tune in and take a couple or a few long breaths and just notice. Here and now. You did good. Such experience, I can see it. So today's theme, well, I'm going to start with one or two lines from a poem, Amy Lowell's poem, where she writes, "Perched on the muzzle of a cannon, a yellow butterfly is slowly opening and shutting its wings." And I begin with this because in some way it illuminates the poly crisis that we're in. There's climate change, there's AI taking over all kinds of things, there's increasing divisiveness politically, all those kind of things that we know. And then here's the butterfly and the natural world and the oceans and the turning of the seasons that are kind of like, yeah, that's okay, that's small potatoes. We're the earth and we have our seasons, and there are these two things and they're happening at the same time. And part of the question is, how do we hold this? How do we hold the unbearable beauty of this earth and the ocean of tears? And what does it mean to be a human being, especially at this time? And how can Buddhist teachings and practice be of value to us? So before I go any further, a few questions. How many of you are students at Stanford? Great. Those are the smart ones, okay. How many of you are part of the Stanford community in some other way? Faculty? Yes, and other things. Wonderful. How many of you are new to meditation? Virgins. Wow. There still are a few. Amazing. Okay. How many have done a residential meditation retreat of some days? Wow. Like half of you. And you still came. It's so good. Okay. Let me ask you this. Yeah. What are the themes or topics that would be most valuable for you to hear? And we're not going to take the time to carry the mic, but just raise your hand and say it, and I'll see if I can hear it or repeat it.
Keeping meditation going during rough times.
Keeping meditation going during rough times. How to hold inner peace when the seas are up. Yes, please.
Politics.
Politics. Oh, yes. That pesky little problem. Yes.
How to cultivate or feel compassion to people who we think are doing horrible things.
How to feel compassion for people who are doing horrible things or causing suffering. Yes.
Balancing a career with meditation.
Say that again.
Balancing a career with meditation.
Balancing a career with meditation.
How to keep the meditation going on after 40 years?
How to keep it going after some years. Yes.
Positive social change.
Positive social change. Terrific. Let's see in the back if you want to shout.
Separating identity from achievement.
Separating identity from achievement. Beautiful. Agency and the perception of self. One more. Louder.
How to channel anger and frustration.
Did somebody hear that again?
How to channel anger and frustration.
How to channel anger and frustration. Okay, great question. All right, so basically, I hope you brought your pajamas. We're going to be here a long time. Okay. This. It's really obvious that no amount of technology, computers and internet and AI and biotechnology and space technology and nanotechnology is going to stop continuing warfare, is going to stop continuing divisiveness and conflict, is going to stop climate change, is going to stop racism, is going to stop the ways that we're mistreating the earth. All the technological and scientific developments are not going to do that because their source is in the human heart. And if that's not tended, then the technologies follow, all these other possibilities. The change that needs to happen is not just an outer change, but we are in a time of change that Joanna Macy, the great systems theorist and Buddhist teacher, calls the great turning. That humanity is in a place now where we have to shift from an exploitation model of how we live on this earth to get as much from the earth and one another to one of interbeing and interconnection. And if we don't find a way to do that, we're just going to continue to suffer more greatly. And we can feel it. It's in the air, it's in the politics, it's in the news, it's in our personal lives and more. And so the outer technology has to be matched. And here we are at Stanford, sort of in the belly button of the technological birthplace, right? We hope it's a good birth, that's all I'll say. But here we are. The outer technology has to be matched by an inner technology. And that's really what the teachings from the thousands of years of tradition, wisdom traditions, the Buddhist tradition and so forth, offer as an inner technology. And for me, I had a good, so-called good Ivy League education. And then I went into a Buddhist monastery because my education was only 50%, basically. I learned chemistry and math and, history and all the kinds of things one might study as an undergraduate. But when I went to the monastery and I started to meditate, I could feel the anger somebody asked about back there. I was the peacemaker in my family because my father was a brilliant scientist and borderline mentally ill, certainly violent and abusive. And nobody ever talked to me about anger in all my education. Nobody ever talked to me about trauma in all my education. Nobody ever talked to me about lust or longing or, making connections. That wasn't, except for, reading some novels, it was not in my education. Nobody taught me how to deal with fear and anxiety or all the kinds of thoughts that proliferate. And so when I got to the monastery, I realized this is the education, the part of the education that I really need. And of course it was tough because I was sitting in my little hut in the forest on the border of Thailand and Laos. At that time in the 60s, it was pretty remote, and trying to become peaceful. And I'd been the peacemaker in my family. I have 3 brothers. Everybody had their strategy to deal with the suffering. I was the peacemaker, and I thought of myself that way. And then some of the monks who had little huts near me, they weren't behaving the way I thought they should, and I started to get irritated. And then I got really angry. And I went to the teacher and I said, I'm really angry at the way these monks. And he looked at me, Ajahn Chah, and he said, good. I said, good? Why is that? I mean, this was everything I'd suppressed for all those years. He said, because now you're going to learn about anger. He said, go back to your little hut. It had a tin roof. It's the tropics. It's hot. Close the one window you have. Wrap yourself in your robes. And if you're going to be angry, do it right. Sit there in the middle of it. Notice the stories it tells, how right you are, how important you feel. And just let yourself come to terms with it in yourself in ways that I had never done. And so this is a different kind of education. And Lord knows, or Buddha knows, or whoever it is up there or out there, that we need this on this earth. So, how to deal with fear. Sitting in the monastery charnel grounds when the bodies are burned to do a reflection about the impermanence of life. And it gets more real that way. And learning a lot about the practices of love. And in some way, this was really the education of the heart. How do you hold all this with compassion? You see it and you feel it all in yourself, and you're human, and at the same time you don't want to get caught in it in a way that causes harm to you or someone else. So Thich Nhat Hanh, most of you have heard of him, great Vietnamese Zen master said, when the crowded Vietnamese refugee boats met with storms or pirates, if everyone panicked, all would be lost. But if even one person was calm and centered, it was enough. It showed the way for everyone to survive. Do you know who that person is? Miss Piggy would say, moi, right? It happens to be you. You know, you're in the boat, and it's what's needed for you. And so I got a call from the CEO of Ford Motors. I work with a bunch of CEOs now. I've got a lot of friends at that level, met with them. So from Bill Ford, who's a dear friend, and I talk about it because we've done some things publicly. And I work with the CEO of Nike and the CEO of whatever it is. Anyway, and this was some years ago in 2008, in an economic meltdown. And he called and he said, I listened to your meditations, I read your stuff, I've been doing other practices. He said, I need help. I said, what's up? He said, well, Chrysler just declared bankruptcy. GM declared bankruptcy. Ford is teetering, but hanging in. He said, I'm about to lose my grandfather's company and the entire industry on my watch, and I can't sleep. What you got, basically? How do you do you have something that will help? And so we started doing some metta loving kindness practices and things that would kind of both strengthen and soften his heart in a way that he could feel compassion for the whole struggle of it all, and that it wasn't his job to fix it all, but to be that person on the boat. So we did different practices like that. And these practices are based on the Buddhist principles, which we'll go through some tonight through practicing. First, the Four Noble Truths, which say the first truth is that life has suffering. Anybody not have that? Please raise your hand. Okay, so we got that one. Doesn't say life is suffering, because it's not. It has chocolate mousse and, baked Alaska and surfing, but it has suffering, and every life has it. Secondly, there's causes for suffering, and the causes are attachment. The causes are greed, hatred, ignorance. And the more greed, hatred, and ignorance, the more suffering. You can look at individually in your life, the greed, the fear, the hatred, but collectively, in a nation, if there's more greed and there's more hatred, there'll be more suffering. Second noble truth. The third and fourth, there's a path to the end of the suffering. That was the part that was interesting. When I heard that, I kind of leaned forward. Okay, I've got the suffering part. What you got that can help me? And that path to the end of suffering and freedom doesn't mean you won't have pain or you won't grow old. You get the 10,000 joys and sorrows of your life, but that sometimes it's called the miracle, there's a capacity for you as a human, for the human heart, to step back, to grow in compassion and understanding, and not be caught in the whole drama of it, so that you can tend and connect with love, but also know that the dramas, personal or collective, they're not the end of the story, and they're not who you really are. Ram Dass, my dear friend, used to put it this way. He would say, remember your true nature, divine nature, the vastness of all things, and remember your social security number, right? So that they're not separate, but they actually have to be respected in these dimensions of our life. So what we're going to do in a moment is to do a practice together. I taught Bill a loving kindness practice, which was really helpful for him. And you start where it's easy. You don't say, okay, I'm going to start with this person I hated. Forget it, it's not going to work. You start with whatever touches your heart. That child in your life, or for some people it's their dog the least judgmental being in their life. Tail wags. Somebody loves me unconditionally, right? You start where it touches your heart, and you let that open, and then you say, well, how about that one who's pretty kind, and that one I like? And little by little, you expand your circle of love until then you work with those pesky, difficult people around you and more, and you realize that you can do it. It's actually, it's an invitation to transform from the judgmental mind into the great heart of compassion. And there's practices to do it. So when we first started to teach mindfulness 50 or more years ago, some of my colleagues, Joseph Goldstein, Sharon Salzberg, others, one of the things we found is that when people were trying to be mindful, it became, and meditate, it could become a little like a grim duty. I'm mindful, and I'm trying to get rid of those thoughts and trying to untie the knots in my body. You know, I go to the gym and I go to therapy, I work out, I've got a good diet, and now I meditate. And there was so much self-judgment and so much evaluation about how you're supposed to be. So we started pairing mindfulness and loving kindness practice. And now what I like to use as a language is mindful, loving awareness, that they're actually not separate. If you can be present with your own body and your own heart and mind, and then those people around you and the world around you. So, and that requires cultivating or opening the gateway of presence. Albert Einstein, a quote from Albert, which I would have thought was an artifact of the internet, except I read it in Scientific American, which, you know, I know that science is under attack, but nevertheless, Albert purportedly said, if you can drive safely while kissing a girl, you're simply not giving the kiss the attention it deserves. And this kind of summarizes a lot of the game of meditation. That can you actually be present for the person in front of you, for your own body, for the things that need tending? Instead of living in, you know, you walk down the street and you're thinking about all the things you did and need to do in those people, and you miss the sunset, you know, reflected in the puddle and in the sidewalk, those amazing colors, or you miss the amazingness of another human being walking by, because they're all so weird. You know that. We are, aren't we? You know, how did you get in there? I mean, how did that happen? Really, you don't know, do you? But you got it. There's a little baby, and then here I am. Okay. It's really mysterious. So mindful, loving awareness is not about fixing. It's a shift of identity from being caught in what's present to becoming the loving witness of it, if you will, or the space of consciousness, which is who you are. You're not your body, I promise you, you're not. I mean, it hurts and you want to take care of it and feed it and, you know, sleep it and do all the things it needs. But because you were in this little body and then you were a teenager and then you're whatever, it keeps, and then you'll be in an older body. I'm 80. It's sort of weird. How does this happen? It's not who you are. Who you are is the awareness itself, the thoughts and all that. So learning this is a tremendously valuable and powerful art. And it's not about attaining something. It's much more about relaxing and inviting a sense of spacious presence for whatever is here, including the fact that you can't do it sometimes. And then the judging mind says, I'm no good at meditation. You say, thank you for your opinion. You know whose voice that is. We won't talk about them. But you say, thank you for your opinion. Who knew that they could tell you about meditation? Those people that taught you how to judge yourself. Anyway, all of that can be held in the field of mindful, loving awareness. So shall we do some practice together? You good to do that? This is going to be like 12 minutes, maybe 15 minutes. We have 2 practices to do. So in 15 minutes, you just did a 10-day meditation retreat following the foundation. I know you're smart here at Stanford, it's good. Following the foundations of mindfulness, the mindfulness of breath and body, mindfulness of emotions and feelings, mindfulness of the mind, mindfulness of relations, and then mindfulness of awareness itself. The things that were most important, pedagogically speaking, about this, that I hope you got a sense of, was that the gift or the art of meditation isn't to change things or to fix them or to make you better, although as you become more aware, thankfully for your family, you actually do become better. But that's not the game. The game is really to become that loving awareness and say, oh, this too. And it's actually going to serve you in your intimate relations with people. It's going to serve you in the work that you do because you're not caught up as much. And it will be there for you when you die. You'll see. Instead of being so caught, when you realize, oh, this is an amazing dance, and I get to have this dance. And my experience, I could go in a whole long thing about sitting with lots of people who are dying and my own out-of-body experiences and meditation, all these things. But basically, when you sit with people who are dying and they're at least vaguely conscious, especially the ones that sort of die and then come back, near death and so forth, you float out of your body. And then you kind of look and say, wow, that was a ride, wasn't it, that incarnation? Woo, wonder where we're going next. I mean, sort of like that. I'm sort of being playful, but not really. Not really. And there's thousands of stories of people who were in a car accident and floated out of their body and saw the ambulance and watched everything that they could never have seen with their eyes, which were closed. So many stories like that, because who you are is consciousness. And to begin to practice in this way, to bring love and awareness together to loving awareness is liberating. It's freeing. All right. I am now aware of our time together and know that I want to do another practice that takes 15 minutes or so, which we can do. And I kind of want to do questions and things too, because I love doing that, or dialogue. But I think that I should do the next practice, and then we'll use whatever time is left for dialogue and reflections. First, a poem. I've got a couple here, but this one by Stella Nasanovic. It can happen like that, meeting at the auto repair, buying tires amidst the smell of rubber, the grating sound of jackhammers and drills. Anywhere we share stories, grace flows between us. The tire center waiting room becomes a healing place as one speaks of her husband's heart valve replacement, bed sores from complications. A man speaks of multiple surgeries, notes his false appearance as strong and healthy. I share my sister's death from breast cancer, her youngest only 7. A woman rises, gives her name, Mrs. Henry, then takes my hand, and suddenly an ordinary day becomes holy ground. And this is what attention can be. We can see the sacred in one another. We can see it where we are. And that was the practice that you were just doing. Thank you to your heart for caring so much. It's okay. We can tolerate. Our heart is big enough for this. Thank you to your body. And then you start to listen. If you want to go even further with it, when sitting with your body, you can say, what message do you have for me today? And if you're quiet and respectful, your body will answer. It'll tell you something about how you should live. It doesn't take long. You're opening the channel of a deeper wisdom. So we went through the foundations of Four Noble Truths: suffering, its causes, greed, hatred, ignorance, the clinging, and the release, the path which we just practiced, the path of mindfulness, of breath and body and feelings and thoughts in the world. Okay, you're halfway through your great Buddhist curriculum. Next practice. There is also, along with the Four Noble Truths, somehow we're doing the fours tonight. There's a whole Buddhist text called the Fours. I got lost in it tonight here. The four foundations of mindfulness and the Four Noble Truths. There are also what are called the four qualities of the awakened heart. And these are the qualities when you see with loving awareness, when you step back to become the loving witness of the suffering and the beauty of life, both, which you have and which is just part of the curriculum. When you see them, the qualities that awaken, first is love. Love is that connection with everything, because love is like gravity. Nobody really understands it, but it's there and it pulls everything together. It's this mysterious connection that can't be denied. When love meets suffering, and there are these practices like loving kindness, metta practice, where you wish well, you can't wish well to somebody who's suffering a lot and say, may you be happy and filled with love and stuff. They're suffering. And so love actually turns in itself into compassion. It's the second quality of the awakened heart. When the heart meets pain and suffering, it opens in compassion. When love meets the world not in its suffering form, it turns into joy. And it's called shared joy. There's a word in Sanskrit called mudita, shared joy. That there's a kind of intrinsic delight in being alive, not because you're trying to get anything or judge anything or be something or so, but just how mysterious it is that we're here. I'm just looking at you. If I were an alien, I'd say, okay, what kind of fur do these beings have? You've got a lot of colors, by the way. White and black and blue and, some with fur and some without. And I mean, it's wild. Honestly, it is how you get in this body. And then there's a hole in one end to which you stuff dead plants and animals and grind them down with the bones, right? And glug them through the tube to the other end. And these things that stick out, as mine do prominently, that catch the vibe. And I wiggle my tongue, and I say pink elephant, right? And you can picture that. No one knows how that works, really. Yes, there's a vibration, and it hits the tympanic part of the ear, and the electrochemical signals that go into the auditory part of the brain, and then pink elephant, baby, How does that happen? It is so mysterious. And then here you are in this human body, and look how you propel yourself. You fall one way, you're a biped, and you catch yourself, and then you fall the other way. And you have a little vestigial tail, and you take this for granted. It is weird. And if that's not weird enough, notice what happens the next time you're making love. It's a fabulous thing to do. I recommend it. It's bizarre. It is, actually. So here we are, we're stepping back and we're saying, look at human incarnation, and we have this amazing capacity to step back. And then in it, we can see from the Four Noble Truths, these things out of grasping and greed and hatred and fear and so forth entangle us and cause a lot of suffering. When we see it, when we rest in the awareness, we don't have to go that route. We can see it. We say, thank you for trying to protect me. I'm good, and we can act out of love. So what we will now do is a practice to go through a whole long retreat in 15 minutes of the awakened heart. And there's some other qualities. There's gratitude and generosity and forgiveness, but these are the key ones. What I want to ask of you to do something now physically, and that is to remain silent and to find a person who is sitting next to or near you that you can turn to and partner with for this meditation, because it's a partnered meditation. So let me say a few things and then we'll have some dialogue. I know this is sometimes hard, especially if you're shy. It's like, oh my God, I have to do that, right? But you survive, which is, hallelujah. And it's weird, but, we're weird, so what can we say? We went through, again, what would have been a long retreat of exploring the practices of loving kindness, of compassion, of joy. There's a whole practice of learning the joyful heart. And then of the vast piece of resting in awareness itself. And the reason that, pedagogically, the reason that I wanted to do these practices with you tonight is it feels like the most important thing from these teachings is how do you do them and how can they help you in your life. And they're beautiful teachings and so forth, but to do those foundations of mindfulness and realize I can step back and notice what all the emotions are, or notice what's happening in my mind. I'm not my thoughts. You are not your thoughts. Thank God, right? I mean, it's a revelation. You're not your body. There's a revelation for you. You adopted it. It's your pet. You take care of it, feed it, But who you are is consciousness that was born into this body. And that's liberating. And then the gazing to one another was just that same invitation to step back and see from a much deeper level of consciousness than we normally have. And these are the kind of teachings and trainings that are available, in the Buddhist pantheon, if you will. But they're really just fundamentally human. They're not Buddhist. They're an invitation to pay attention really deeply. And then they're a doorway to liberation. Because when you can tolerate, the neuroscientists talk about expanding the window of tolerance is what meditation can do. When you can sit there and gaze and bear witness to the suffering behind these eyes, it allows you to be there and not be frightened and not turn your gaze away. When you can see the beauty and feel that love, or when you can rest in the vastness and say, wow, isn't this an amazing dance? It gives you a kind of inner freedom. And then, Zen Master Suzuki Roshi put it this way. He said, in Zen there are only two things. You sit and you sweep the garden. You sit and you sweep the garden. So you remember who you really are, you do your practice, and then you pick up your broom and you go out to the garden of the world. All right, so I'm interested, especially, how many of you, sometimes people have kind of amazing experiences of this. Not always, and you're not supposed to. Might have been horrible and whatever, you got through it. But on the other hand, somebody was saying, we've been married for 32 years. I never saw her before. Of course, she's been saying that for a long time, but, I saw the cosmic nature of her. Anybody have those kind of experiences? So I'll read you a tiny story, and then we'll do another one. It was a busy morning, about 8:30, when an elderly gentleman in his 80s arrived to have stitches removed from his hand. He was in a hurry as he had an appointment at 9 a.m. I took his vital signs, had him sit down, knowing it could be more than an hour before he would be tended by the doctor. And it looked healed enough to me. I talked to another doctor, got the supplies, and decided to do it myself. While taking care of his wound, I asked if he had another doctor's appointment this morning, as he was in such a hurry. The gentleman told me that he needed to go to the nursing home to eat breakfast with his wife. I inquired as to her health. He told me she'd been there for a while and that she was a victim of Alzheimer's disease. And as we talked, I asked if she would be upset if he was a bit late. He replied that she no longer knew who he was and that she had not recognized him for 5 years now. I was surprised, and I asked him, "And you still go every morning, even though she doesn't know who you are?" He smiled, patted my hand, and said, "She doesn't know me, but I know who she is." And that, said this nurse, is the kind of love that I want to show and have in my life. So we go through all kinds of states, and you're weeping and grieving, and I'm glad for your tears. They're holy tears, and they're honorable, and there's not some way you're supposed to feel. I remember having done hospice work over years and kind of in the lineage of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and Stephen Levine, good friends, whatever. And one of the things that I think it was Elizabeth, it might have been Stephen, said is, people die in character. Some of them die peacefully, some of them die rage against the light, some of them don't want to talk about it, some of them die weeping. There isn't a rule book about who you're supposed to be. Can you hold this life, your life and the life of the others around you, with what you just did with that gaze of compassion? And say, yeah, it's hard. And not to be afraid to keep your heart open anyway. So this is part of what you're learning in these practices, is expanding the window of tolerance, being able to be present for what Oscar Wilde called the tainted glory of humanity, And we know how tainted it is, how messy right now and divisive, and how much, the continuing hatred and racism and conflict and so forth. But we're also so much bigger than that. And you get to be the Buddha. I was just with the Dalai Lama in India in Dharamsala, and he's 90, and he's sort of pulled back mostly from teaching, but he still will do blessings, and the field of his kindness is palpable. It was really special. And people say, well, he has a great laugh, and he laughs a lot. And how can you be so happy when there's also so much suffering in the world? And he said, well, so much has been taken from me. I can't go back to my homeland for 50 years. I can't go to Tibet. They have destroyed the monasteries, burned our sacred texts, thrown our monks and nuns into prison. They've taken so much. Why should I let them take my happiness? Because if you go into a refugee camp, it doesn't help to be depressed and frightened. They already have enough of that, actually. And when I've been in refugee camps, when there are people that work there that have a kind of tenderness and joy and courage, it helps everybody. My beloved Trudy, my wife, was working in a refugee camp in Chad on the border of Darfur, immensely poor, hardly enough food for the kids to get more than one meal a day. And she's an early childhood expert and a meditation teacher and a psychologist and a writer and all these kind of things. But she went to work because they wanted somebody who could help, especially the women in these camps who were under so much pressure and so difficult. And she taught them, different kinds of childhood education things. And she also taught them mindfulness and stuff. And when she left, she said, what was the favorite thing? And she taught them ball games with the kids and how to teach them how to create community and all these things. And they said, mindfulness. And she was surprised, and she said, why is that? She said, because our past was so painful, and the future was so unknown, and you've taught us to open our eyes, our hearts, and open our eyes to be here where we are with one another. And I would never have expected that that would have been their answer, but it has a power to be present for this world in a kind of amazing way. So then the last thing, because we have to wind up, and there's so much, I'd love to have more conversation with you. We could stay for a while, but I think we're not supposed to, you know, what the hell. And that is that in the Buddhist tradition, there is the notion of a bodhisattva, a compound Sanskrit word. Bodhi means awakened, and sattva means being. And so it's a being who's committed to the awakening of all. The Buddha was a bodhisattva working it out over a lot of lifetimes. By the way, he had trouble when he went home to his family. So did Jesus. So you should keep in mind whatever ideals you have about this stuff. Family, his Thanksgiving's coming. I wish you well, right? But anyway, the vision of a bodhisattva, and you can often you'll take bodhisattva vows if you're in a Zen center and you sit in the morning, you do these great vows. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them all. That's one of the translations of the 4 great bodhisattva vows. There's a wee problem in this, and that is that when you go home, the people in your family don't want to be saved by you. You may have noticed that. So it has to have some other meaning. And the meaning is that you turn your heart to compassion, like the Dalai Lama, no matter what has happened. My road, my life, my energy is all committed to the well-being, to alleviating suffering and the well-being of whoever I meet, whatever I see. And that's what it means to be a bodhisattva. And so if we had time tonight, I'd actually do a little meditation. You could write your own bodhisattva vow, but I'm gonna read one to you to inspire you. The Dalai Lama wakes up in the middle of the night at like 3:30 a.m. I hate getting up early, but in the monastery, they would ring the bell at 3:30 a.m. And I go, oh no, I gotta get up. I wanted to sleep. But anyway, and his vow from Shantideva is, may I be medicine for the sick. May I be a resting place for the weary. May I be a lamp for those in the darkness. May I be an inspiration for beings everywhere, and to all of us awaken into connection and love and liberation. And may I do it as long as the sun and moon and the galaxies exist. So the Bodhisattva kind of takes the long view in case you're worried about the next election cycle. You know, it's like much, much, much bigger vision. And here's a modern Bodhisattva vow for you. I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to ask you to sit quietly just for a minute or two and think about if you were to take the inspiration of these practices that we did to see deeply into the heart of another being, their sorrow and their joy and their vastness, what would your bodhisattva vow be? This one from poet Diane Ackerman, a friend. She writes, in the name of daybreak and the eyelids of morning and the wayfaring moon and the night when it departs, I swear I will not dishonor my soul with hatred, but offer myself humbly as a guardian of nature, a healer of misery, a messenger of wonder, and an architect of peace. And of course, she's a beautiful poet. But I invite you to close your eyes, since we've come together in this way tonight as we finish. And if you were to write a little bodhisattva vow for yourself, And it could be very simple. I vow to be kind. It doesn't have to be a big long poem. What would it be? When you're ready, let your eyes open. And if you want, before you get up or go, you can put it in your phone or something. It actually helps to write it down. Some you kind of remember it. And if we had more time, I'd do something else terrifying. You'd have to turn to the people around you and read it, you know. And it's an amazing thing because it's very tender to say, well, this is actually what my heart would commit itself to. So thank you for your kind attention, your willingness to do strange things together with one another. Thank you, Irene and Paul. Paul has something to say, it appears. Professor. He's a great guy, by the way. I asked his wife. She said, yeah, he is.
I feel bound to thank our sponsors, first of all, the TTWF Chow Foundation, and to thank all of you for coming out tonight, and especially to thank Jack for sharing his wisdom with you. I was going to, before sending you off, express the wish that we might live in less interesting times, but certainly I think what we've learned here tonight is that we should live. And so thank you very much, Jack, and thank you very much, all of you.
Oh, okay. Shameless advertising. This week I have a new book out called All in This Together. You can get it where you get your books. Thank you.